The fog wasn't just a weather pattern in Havenwood, Oregon. It was a permanent resident, a shroud of silver gray that defined the town's borders. It clung to the Cascade foothills with a possessive, chilling grip, swallowing the tops of the ancient Douglas firs and turning the two-lane highway into a slick black ribbon disappearing into nothing. The fog muffled sound, it dampened light, and it made the entire town feel like an island, adrift in a silent, spectral sea. And at the very edge of that island, the last beacon before a 50-mile stretch of darkness, was the Starlight Diner. Its neon sign, a sputtering blue star with 2 points burnt out, fought a losing, flickering battle against the night. Inside, the air was a thick, familiar soup. The rich, borderline burnt smell of coffee that had been on the warmer for 6 hours. The sharp tang of old grease embedded in the grill's steel, and the faint, almost ghostly sweetness of the cherry pie in the glass display case. For Ilara, the world had shrunk to the 20-foot stretch of the laminate countertop. It was her third time wiping it down, her movements automatic, hypnotic. The rag swished over the worn, faux marble surface, tracing the hairline cracks that mapped it like an unknown continent. The clock above the kitchen passed through. A grinning cartoon cat showed 11:50 p.m. Its tail ticked back and forth, each click a hammer blow against the silence. 10 more minutes. The night had been agonizingly slow, a long, drawn-out breath broken only by the thrumming hum of the coolers and a single trucker who'd stopped for a thermos fill-up 3 hours ago. He'd called her sweetheart, paid in exact change, and vanished back into the mist. Since then, the diner had held only 2 sets of occupants, Ilara, whose exhaustion felt like a physical weight on her shoulders, and the silent trio in booth 7. They had entered not with the jangle of the bell, but like the fog itself, seeping in just as the last streak of sunset had been erased from the sky. They hadn't looked at the menu. They had requested, in a voice so low Ilara had barely heard it, the darkest booth, the one under the perpetually flickering fluorescent panel, the one the staff called the morgue. The man who seemed to be their leader, all sharp angles, pale skin, and a timeless, unsettling beauty that didn't belong in Havenwood, had ordered 3 black coffees. He hadn't looked at her when he spoke. His eyes, the color of a moonless night sky, were fixed on some point beyond the diner wall. The 3 mugs now sat untouched on their table, the black liquid long since gone cold, mirroring the atmosphere they had brought in with them. Ilara had tried not to stare, but her gaze was a moth drawn to a cold flame. The leader, the one her mind had instinctively named Damian, he looked like a Damian, like a character from a tragic old-world painting, sat facing the room. He wore a perfectly tailored black wool coat, absurdly formal for a roadside diner in Oregon, yet on him it looked like armor. His stillness was profound, absolute. He didn't fidget. He didn't tap his fingers. He didn't even seem to blink. He was flanked by 2 others, poised like statues in the dim light. A woman, sharp and severe, with hair the color of oxidized iron, pulled back so tightly it seemed painful. Watched the door. Her stillness was not passive. It was that of a panther, waiting, every muscle coiled. The other man was a mountain of muscle packed into a worn leather jacket, his head shaved, his knuckles scarred and split. He looked, as Ilara's grandmother would have said, like he had seen enough of the world to recognize trouble, and then caused most of it. Ilara felt their presence like a sudden drop in temperature, a pocket of Arctic air in the otherwise warm, greasy diner. An hour ago, she had approached with the coffee pot. "More?" she'd asked. Damian, without looking at her, had simply lifted one long-fingered hand, palm out. She'd stopped, not because of the gesture, but because of the feeling that washed over her. A wave of cold, silent authority that said, "Go. Now." And she had. Now, she just wanted to lock the door and run to her small, drafty apartment. She was wiping the counter, her mind focused on the click of the lock, the turn of the key. 10 minutes. She reached under the counter, her fingers brushing the worn switch for the open sign. Just as her finger found the plastic, the bell above the door jangled violently, screaming in protest. It shattered the quiet, making her jump. 3 men stumbled in, bringing a gust of cold, fog-laced air and the sour, unmistakable stench of cheap beer and wet wool. Ilara's heart, which had been beating a slow, tired rhythm, slammed against her ribs and began to race. She knew them. Of course she knew them. In a town this small, you knew everyone, especially the trouble. Vince, JT, and Donnie. Local fixtures, as reliable and unpleasant as the winter damp. Vince, the tall one in front, wore a grin that was all teeth and malice, his eyes already bleary. "We're not here to buy," Vince slurred, his voice too loud, echoing a sentiment she'd only read about in nightmares. He was trying to sound intimidating, like a line from a movie. His 2 friends fanned out, their laughter low and wet. Ilara gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Sorry, Vince. We're closed. You know that. 11:50. Her voice trembled, and she hated herself for it. "Closed?" Vince echoed mockingly, taking a heavy, swaying step closer. He leaned heavily on the counter, his unwashed denim and beer smell washing over her, invading her space. "We're just getting started. Aren't we, boys?" JT, the lanky one with greasy hair, moved with a feigned casualness toward the side aisle, blocking her only path to the back office and the phone. Donnie, heavy and slow, just stood by the door, a stupid grin on his face, blocking the exit. A perfect, drunken triangle. The air, already thick, felt suddenly suffocating. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Vince taunted, leaning in closer. His breath was hot and alcoholic, and she had to fight the urge to gag. "Nervous? You shouldn't be nervous. We're just friendly." When she didn't answer, just stared at him with wide, frightened eyes, his smirk hardened. The playful malice vanished, replaced by something ugly. He wasn't just drunk, he was mean, and he'd just found a target. "Maybe you just need some entertainment. It's a slow night. Guess we found some tonight." He lunged. It was so fast, not for the register, not for the tip jar, for her. His hand closed on the front of her red and white striped apron, twisting the fabric, yanking her forward. Ilara gasped, stumbling against the counter, her hands flying up to push him away. "Get off me, Vince! Get out!" "Feisty," he growled, his other hand grabbing her wrist. "I like feisty." He gave a final, vicious tug. The apron strap, old and thin, couldn't take the strain. It tore with a sharp, sickening rip that seemed to echo in the sudden, absolute silence. Ilara stumbled back, clutching the torn cloth, tears of fear and pure humiliation burning in her eyes. Vince and his friends burst into laughter, loud, braying, mocking, and cruel. And then the laughter died. Not slowly. It cut off, as if a switch had been thrown. A sound had come from the back of the diner. Or rather, a lack of sound. The thrumming hum of the coolers, the buzz of the clock, the flicker of the light over booth 7. It all ceased. The air pressure in the diner seemed to drop, leaving a hollow, ringing vacuum. Vince froze, his hand still holding a piece of her torn red apron. Who the hell? The three shadows in booth 7 were no longer in booth 7. They hadn't stood up. They hadn't walked. They were simply there, standing in the middle of the diner. It wasn't a brawl. A brawl is messy, loud, and human. This was a storm, and it lasted less than 5 seconds. Kyle, the broad-shouldered one, moved first. He wasn't a man. He was a black streak, a blur that Alara's mind couldn't even process. He had been standing behind Damian, and in the space of a single stolen breath, he was at the counter. JT, the lanky one blocking Alara's escape, didn't even have time to turn his head. Kyle's hand, a scarred fist, impacted JT's side with a sound like a wet thud and a crack. JT was lifted off his feet and slammed against the counter so hard the pie case rattled, the glass whining in its frame. He didn't get up. The woman, Serafina, moved with a terrifying, serpentine grace. Donnie, by the door, fumbled to raise his hands, his stupid grin gone, replaced by a mask of confusion. She was already on him. It was delicate, precise. A twist of his arm, a sound like a thick, dry branch snapping in the quiet. A high-pitched, girlish scream was cut off as she shoved him, hard, through the door. He tumbled into the foggy parking lot, landing in a heap. Vince stood frozen, his eyes wide with a drunken, terrified disbelief. The piece of Alara's apron fell from his fingers. He tried to shove the man in front of him, the man who had appeared from nowhere, the man who hadn't seemed to move at all. Damian. He hadn't moved with the chaotic, impossible speed of his companions. He had simply closed the distance, his black coat undisturbed, his pale face a mask of cold fury. He caught Vince's wrist mid-shove. Vince, tough and mean, the terror of Havenwood's only bar, suddenly looked like a child gripping an iron bar. "You!" Vince stammered, his bravado vanishing, replaced by a primal, sober terror. Damian's voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, steady, and dangerous whisper that cut through the silence like a razor. "You might want to let go of that." Vince tried to pull his hand free, his face contorting. But Damian's grip was absolute. "What's it to you, old man?" Vince spat, a last, pathetic attempt at defiance. That was his mistake. Damian's eyes, those bottomless black pools, finally focused, truly focused, on Vince. And in them, Alara saw an abyss. "She," Damian said, his voice dropping to a note that vibrated in Alara's bones, "is not for you to touch." A sickening, wet crunch echoed through the diner. It was not loud, but it was definitive. Damian tightened his grip. Vince howled, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, as the bones in his wrist shattered like chalk. Damian twisted, a simple, elegant pivot of his own wrist, and Vince was on the floor, on his knees, groaning and weeping, clutching his ruined hand. JT, recovering from the counter, scrambled to his feet, holding his ribs, and bolted, running out the door after Donnie. Vince, weeping, scrambled backward on all fours like a crab and stumbled out into the night, vanishing into the fog. The bell chimed weakly, then fell silent. Silence. Alara stood behind the counter, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She was trembling so hard her knees threatened to buckle. Her torn apron was still clutched in her hands. The diner, which had been a haven, suddenly felt alien, cold. Kyle and Serafina had retreated. She hadn't seen them move. They were just back in booth 7, melting into the shadows as if they had never left. Only Damian remained, standing in the middle of the diner where Vince had been. The predator who had broken a man's hand with casual, horrifying disdain was gone. He turned. The man who looked at her now was different. His posture, which had been rigid with menace, softened. The killing frost in his eyes thawed, replaced by something she couldn't name, something ancient and tired and gentle. He took one slow, deliberate step toward her, his movements fluid and soundless. He stopped just on the other side of the counter, a safe distance away. "Are you harmed?" His voice was a velvet rumble, infused with an accent she couldn't place, something old-world and melodic. She could only shake her head, unable to speak, and nodded. Her voice, when she found it, was a cracked whisper. "Thank you." His gaze dropped to the torn red fabric in her fist. He reached out a hand, slowly, as if not to frighten a deer, his fingers long and pale. He didn't touch her, but his fingertips hovered just an inch above the tattered edge of the apron. His skin, she noted with a strange, detached sense of wonder, seemed to radiate a faint, impossible cold. She could feel it on her own hand. "He should not have laid hands on you," Damian said, his voice soft, yet holding an underlying edge of possession that sent a new, entirely different shiver down her spine. "How?" Elara swallowed, her throat dry. "How did you— What? Who?" He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The world outside, the fog, the diner, the smell of grease. It all fell away. There was only the intense, focused gravity of his stare. It wasn't just a look. It felt like a physical weight, a gentle pressure. Elara. Her breath hitched. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had said her name, which was stitched on the very apron he was looking at. But he hadn't looked at the apron. He had been looking at her eyes. How do you know my name?" A shadow of a smile, so sad and profound it broke her heart a little, touched the corner of his perfect mouth. "I have been searching for you, Elara." His gaze was hypnotic, drawing her in, and for the first time that night, she felt a new kind of fear, one mingled with a terrifying, electric curiosity. "I have been searching," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "for a very, very long time, though I did not expect to find you. Like this." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. "I have been searching for you, for a very, very long time." Elara's breath, which she hadn't realized she was holding, came out in a ragged gasp. The diner, which had fallen into an absolute ringing vacuum, suddenly rushed back in a wave of sensory overload. The tick-tick-tick of the cat clock on the wall was a hammer blow. The thrumming hum of the coolers felt like a vibration in her bones. The smell of stale coffee and burnt sugar made her stomach lurch. "How?" She started again, her voice a dry rasp. "How do you know my name? It's on my apron." Damian's gaze, which had been locked on her eyes, flickered down to the torn red and white fabric clutched in her fist. He hadn't been looking at it. He had known. From the dark corner of booth 7, there was a sound, the scrape of a boot on linoleum. Kyle, the mountain of a man, and Serafina, the iron-haired woman, had risen. They were watching their leader, their expressions unreadable but radiating a coiled, impatient energy. They looked like wolves waiting for the signal to either attack or retreat. Damian didn't turn. He didn't even look in their direction. He simply raised one long-fingered hand, a gesture not of command, but of simple, final dismissal. The two figures paused. Serafina's lips thinned, but she gave a short, sharp nod. In a motion too fluid to be entirely human, they moved to the door. The bell, which had screamed in protest for Vince and his friends, chimed weakly, a soft, respectful ding, as they slipped out into the fog. They didn't open the door. They seemed to pass through the space it occupied, vanishing into the gray shroud as if they were made of it. Now they were truly alone. The silence that fell was different. Not the absence of sound, but a heavy, shared quiet. Ilara, overwhelmed, finally let the torn apron fall from her fist onto the counter. Her hand was shaking violently. She grabbed her wrist, rubbing it, trying to stop the tremors. Damian's eyes snapped to the motion. His focus, which had been a heavy hypnotic weight on her gaze, sharpened to a pinpoint. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, laced with a cold residual fury that made the air around him seem to drop another 10 degrees. Before she could answer, before she could even think, he had moved. He didn't walk around the counter. He was simply there, on her side, standing not 3 feet away. She didn't stumble back. There was nowhere to go. She was pressed against the pie display. His proximity was overwhelming. He was tall, and he radiated a cold that was so profound she could feel it on her skin, a physical presence, a stark contrast to the diner's greasy warmth. "Show me," he commanded, his voice soft, but it was not a request. Ilara's heart was a trapped bird. She was terrified. But a strange, deeper instinct told her that this man, who had just shattered another's hand, would not harm her. Slowly, trembling, she held out her wrist. In the dim, flickering light, a bruise was already blooming, a dark, ugly purple shadow on her skin where Vince had grabbed her. Damian's face, a mask of pale, sculpted perfection, tightened. A flicker of something ancient and terrible passed through his dark eyes. "This," he whispered, "is what they do. This is what vermin do. They break what they cannot have." He reached out. His fingers, long and impossibly pale, hovered over her skin. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "I will not harm you, Ilara," he murmured. Then he touched her. His thumb, a shockingly cold point of contact, pressed gently against the center of the bruise. It wasn't the cold of ice. It was a deep, penetrating void of cold, as if he were drawing all the heat and life from that one spot. It should have hurt. It should have made her recoil. Instead, the throbbing, fiery ache in her wrist vanished. It was gone, not numbed. Gone. She watched, in stunned, silent disbelief, as the dark purple began to fade. The color receded from her skin like a tide pulling back, from angry purple to a sickly yellow, and then to nothing. Her skin was pale, unmarked, and icy cold where he'd touched her. Ilara pulled her hand back, her breath catching in her throat. She stared at her wrist. "What? What did you do?" She looked up at him, her fear now mixed with a profound, terrifying awe. "What are you?" Damian didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching, as if he were dissecting her reaction. He seemed to find what he was looking for. He turned away, a slow, graceful pivot, and walked to the diner's entrance. The open sign was still buzzing, casting a weak blue glow. He reached up and flipped the switch. The buzzing died, plunging the diner's entrance into shadow. Then he reached for the deadbolt. The click-clack of the lock sliding into place was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was so final. He was locking them in, or locking the world out. He turned to face her, a tall silhouette against the fog-shrouded windows. What you saw, the speed, the strength, the healing. He gestured to her wrist. These are not human traits. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're not." "I am a king," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the room. "Of a very old family, a clan, you might call it. and we are without a kingdom." "That's not an answer," Ilara said, surprised at her own boldness. Kyle and Serafina, they weren't human either. And those men? Vince? You? I did what was necessary to protect what is important. And what's that? His dark eyes found hers again. You. The word hit her like a physical blow. Me? You don't even know me. Don't I? He took a step closer, into the dim light. I know that you have worked here, in this glass box on the edge of nothing, for 3 years. I know that you are kind to the truckers, even when they are rude. I know that you read old books about places you will never see. And I know that you are alone. You've been watching me, she breathed, a cold dread mixing with her confusion. No, he said, and for the first time, a note of frustration entered his voice. Not watching. I was drawn. I am old, Ilara. Older than this town. Older than the trees that gave it its name. My existence has been a long gray fog. He gestured to the windows, to the world outside. Much like this. He paused, and his expression changed, becoming vulnerable, almost pained. And then, months ago, I felt something. A light. A resonance. Not a sound, not a sight, but a feeling. A warmth in a life that has known only cold. It was faint, a single star in an endless night. And I followed it. I crossed a continent, following this pull, this hope. And it led me here, to this diner, to you. He looked at her, and the loneliness in his eyes was so profound, so absolute, that it eclipsed her fear. It was the look of a man who had been isolated for centuries. I am what your kind has names for, whispered in the dark. Shadow walker. Night drinker. Vampire is one of the more persistent and crude. He said the word. Vampire. It hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. But looking at the man who had healed her with a touch, who had moved like smoke, who had the eyes of a 1,000-year-old tragedy, it was the only word that fit. You're a vampire king, she said, testing the words. My family is gone, he said, his voice flat, hunted, scattered. I am all that remains of my line, a king of ash and memory. Just as Ilara was trying to process this, trying to frame a reality that now included vampires and ancient bloodlines, a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't the jangle of the bell. It was a low, heavy diesel rumble. Damian, who had been relaxed, open, and vulnerable, changed. He didn't tense, he condensed. He went from an ancient, tragic king to a coiled predator in the space of a heartbeat. Headlights. 2 bright white beams swept across the diner's windows, painting the interior in stark, unforgiving light. They illuminated the counter, the pie case, and Ilara, frozen behind it. Down! Damian's voice was not a shout. It was a snap, a command that bypassed her brain and went straight to her muscles. He moved, a black blur, crossing the room and grabbing her, not gently, pushing her down behind the solid wood of the counter. Stay down. Do not make a sound. The vehicle, a large, heavy-duty truck or van, idled in the parking lot. It was loud, intentionally so. Its engine a throbbing threat. Who is it? Ilara whispered, her heart hammering. Is it them? Vince? No, Damian whispered back, his voice a low growl. He was crouched beside her, but his attention was on the windows. These are not drunken fools. These are something else. The truck door thudded shut. Footsteps. Heavy boots on the gravel parking lot. 1 set, then 2. They were slow, methodical. They weren't looking for coffee. Damian peeked, just an inch, over the counter's edge, through the window. Ilara could see his profile, sharp and dangerous in the dim light. "They are called the Purifiers," he breathed, his voice laced with a venom she hadn't heard before. "Fanatics! Hunters! They hunt what they do not understand." The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. There was a click, a metallic sound, like a heavy-duty flashlight being switched on. A beam of pure, white light, so bright it was blue, cut through the fog and the glass door, striking the back wall. "They have been tracking us for weeks," Damian murmured, his body a solid, protective wall in front of hers. "They knew we were moving west." The light beam moved, scanning the diner, sweeping over the empty booths, over the counter where they had been standing just moments before. Ilara held her breath, pressing her back against the coolers. Then the light stopped. It focused on the floor, on the scuff marks, on the small, dark red droplet of blood near where Vince had fallen. A voice called out from the truck, muffled but clear. "See anything, Jax?" The man at the door grunted. "Fresh, signs of a struggle." And his mark. "Bag it. We'll tag it. The trail is hot." "They're here!" The light clicked off. The footsteps retreated on the gravel. 2 car doors slammed. The diesel engine roared, and with a spray of gravel, the van pulled back onto the highway, its red taillights swallowed by the fog. Silence. Ilara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her entire body trembling. Damian rose slowly, standing to his full height. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at her, and the cold, regal mask was gone. In its place was a look of deep, agonizing desolation. "I followed a light," he whispered, his voice aching with self-loathing, "and I have just led the darkness straight to it. I have led them to you." He, the king, the predator, the ancient power, looked utterly, hopelessly lost. Ilara, still crouched on the floor, looked up at this impossible creature. She should have been afraid of him. He was the monster from the stories, but he wasn't the monster who had just been outside, and he wasn't the monster who had grabbed her apron. You saved me," she whispered, her voice shaking, but not with fear of him. "From Vince, and from them, just now. You hid me." He looked at her, stunned, his black eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored her own. "You are not afraid?" he stated, as if it were a riddle he could not solve. Ilara took a shaky breath, and slowly, using the counter for support, stood up. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice small but clear. "I'm terrified of this, of them, of everything." She looked him straight in the eyes. "But I don't think you're the monster in this story." Ilara's words, "I don't think you're the monster in this story," landed in the supercharged silence with the force of a physical blow. Damian stared at her. He had faced armies. He had been hunted by zealots. He had endured centuries of fear, hatred, and betrayal. Nothing in his long, cold existence had prepared him for this. For a mortal, trembling but defiant, to look upon his true nature and offer understanding. "You do not know what you are saying," he whispered, his voice rough. "You see a man. I am a hunger, a shadow. I am the thing that your ancestors painted on cave walls to explain the darkness. To be near me is to stand at the edge of a cliff." "That's what those men were," Ilara countered, her voice gaining a surprising strength. "Vince, JT, they were the cliff. You just showed up." She took a shaky breath. "You said you were drawn to me, a light. What did you mean? What am I to you?" Damian looked away, a flicker of something close to shame crossing his features. "I do not know. In all my years, I have never It is a connection, a resonance. When you are near, the thirst. He closed his eyes, his hands clenching at his sides. It quietens. The constant, gnawing hunger that has defined my every waking moment for centuries, it recedes. You are an anchor, Ilara, in a way I cannot explain. And a king without an anchor is just a beast, a storm. He looked back at her, the loneliness in his gaze profound. I have just discovered this peace, and in doing so, I have endangered it. I have brought the storm to you. They'll come back. Won't they? She whispered, looking at the dark, fog-shrouded windows. They will, Damian said, his voice flat and hard. The tragic king was gone, replaced by the predator. They have my scent. They have your scent. They are not like the fools who accosted you. They are soldiers, fanatics. They believe they are doing God's work, and in their righteousness, they are more monstrous than any creature of the night. He scanned the diner. This place, this glass box, it is a trap. There is no defense here. There is, Ilara said suddenly. Damian turned. What? A defense, not stone, but, she pointed to the back, the circuit breaker, the storage room, the walk-in freezer. I know this place. You don't. That's my defense. He stared at her, a spark of admiration in his dark eyes. You are not like the others. You keep saying that, she said, grabbing a clean rag. You'd better explain, quickly. As if her words had summoned them, the night exploded. It wasn't a sound, it was light. Whump, a soundless concussion of photons. Every window in the diner simultaneously erupted in an intense, blinding blue-white glare. It was not the light of a flashlight. It was the light of a welder's torch, multiplied by 1,000, focused and weaponized. It was a harsh, violet white that burned. Damian screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, guttural roar of pure agony. He recoiled, stumbling back, his hands flying to his face. Where the light touched his skin, his hands, his neck, it didn't just illuminate. It seared. Smoke began to rise from his coat. "Oovie!" Ilara screamed, realizing what it was. The light was pouring in from every angle, high-powered floodlights mounted on the roof of the purifier's van, bathing the entire diner in a spectrum of light designed to kill. The front door glass shattered, and a man in heavy tactical gear, wearing a dark, reflective visor, stepped through the frame. He held a long, rifle-like weapon, not aimed at Ilara, but at the writhing shadow on the floor. "Target acquired!" the hunter, Jax, yelled. "He's trapped. Light is holding him. Prepare the silver hail." Damian was on his knees, his hands smoking, his body convulsing. He was trying to crawl, to find a shadow, but there were no shadows. The light was everywhere. Absolute. The hunter raised his weapon. Ilara's mind, which had been frozen in terror, snapped into focus. Fear, rage, and a strange protective instinct flooded her system. She wasn't a damsel. This was her diner. "No!" she screamed. The hunter, Jax, turned, surprised to see her standing. "Get out of the way, civilian! We're cleansing this place!" "It's my place!" Ilara roared. She didn't have a weapon, but she had adrenaline, and she had rage. She grabbed the first thing she could find, the heavy stainless steel, still half-full coffee pot from the warmer. "You like light?" she shrieked, and with a primal scream of her own, she threw it. The pot spun end over end, a silver comet. It wasn't aimed at the hunter. It was aimed at the source. It smashed into the front right floodlight on the van. There was a spray of glass, a pop, and a sizzle as the hot coffee hit the bulb. One quarter of the diner plunged into partial shadow. It was enough. Damian, who had been a writhing mass of pain, exploded from the floor. He was not a man. He was a streak of black lightning, a void given motion. "No!" the hunter, Jax, screamed, fumbling with his weapon. Before he could even pull the trigger, Damian was on him. But it was not the controlled movement from before. This was a beast, a desperate, wounded animal. His hand, skin blistered and raw, shot out and gripped the hunter's helmet. "You call this holy?" Damian's voice was a gravelly rasp, smoke rising from his throat. He squeezed. The high-tech helmet crumpled like aluminum foil. The man didn't even have time to scream before Damian threw him, like a doll, back through the doorframe. But there was another. Jax! A second hunter, this one with a heavy, canister-based weapon, was at the side window. He saw his partner go down. He saw Damian, smoking and scorched. He saw Ilara, and he made his choice. He aimed the weapon, a pressurized sprayer, not at Damian, but at Ilara. "Abomination's whore!" he spat, and pulled the trigger. A clear, viscous liquid shot out, spraying across the counter, across Ilara's arms and front. It steamed on contact, silver nitrate solution, mixed with holy water. Ilara screamed as it hit her skin. It was an icy chemical fire, 1,000 hornets stinging her all at once. Damian froze. He had been moving toward the second hunter. But he stopped. He turned. He saw Ilara, her arms covered in the steaming, blistering liquid, her face contorted in agony. And the king broke. "Ilara!" he breathed. The hunter at the window laughed. "Got you, hellspawn. Now watch her burn for you. Watch your anchor dissolve." Damian stood in the middle of the diner, caught between the UV lights that were still searing him and the girl who was screaming. He was torn. If he moved into the light, he would die. If he stayed, Ilara would... "The breaker!" Ilara shrieked, her voice raw with pain, pointing with a blistering hand toward the kitchen. The main breaker!" He understood. The hunter, seeing the exchange, raised his sprayer again. "Oh no, you don't!" But Damian was gone. He dissolved. He became a shadow, a cloud of darkness, and shot through the kitchen pass-through, ignoring the pain of the UV light. Ilara, despite her agony, acted. She dove behind the counter, grabbing the red CO2 fire extinguisher from its mount. "Hey!" she screamed at the hunter, her voice cracking. You missed a spot." The hunter, enraged, turned and sprayed the liquid all over the counter. "Come out, filth!" Whump! Fzzzt! K-thunk! A sound of a heavy industrial switch being thrown. And the diner died. The remaining UV floodlights popped and went dark. The hum of the coolers, the ticking clock, the sputtering neon sign, all of it went dead. They were plunged into near-total darkness, the only light the faint gray mist from the fog outside. The hunter at the window paused, confused. "What?" "You're right," a voice whispered from the darkness, right behind him. The hunter spun around, fumbling with his sprayer. A pale hand, still smoking from its burns, closed around his throat. "I am a monster," Damian's voice said, a cold, final whisper. "But you are human. You had a choice." There was a sound, a sharp, definitive snap. The hunter's body went limp, and Damian let him fall. Silence. The only sound was Ilara's ragged, painful breathing from behind the counter. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Damian walked back into the main room, a tall silhouette against the gray fog. He was no longer smoking. The supernatural healing had begun, but he was diminished. Ilara? His voice was gentle. She rose slowly, her arms held out. The silver nitrate was no longer steaming, but it had left angry, red welts, like acid burns. Tears streamed down her face, but she was not crying from the pain. He came to her, stopping a foot away, afraid to touch her. He looked at her arms, and his face was a mask of such profound guilt and self-hatred that it dwarfed his own injuries. I did this, he whispered. I brought this to you. No, Ilara said, her voice shaking as she looked down at her arms. You didn't. They did. They chose to do this. That man. He aimed at me. Not you. He aimed at me. To hurt you. She took a shaky step forward, closing the distance. She reached out with her unburned hand and, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, she touched his face, his cheek. His skin was cold, but not like ice. It was like cool, smooth marble. He flinched, but did not pull away. He closed his eyes, a single pained breath escaping him. You are a monster, Ilara whispered. Damian's eyes snapped open. I saw what you did, she continued. It was terrible, and you are not human. That's the truth. She looked past him, at the broken door, at the darkness. But those men, Vince, the purifiers, they were the real monsters. They were human. They had a choice, and they chose to hurt, to torment, to cleanse. They chose to harm someone weaker just because they could, just because they hated. She looked back at him, her small, brave hand still on his face. You, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You had the choice, too. You could have run. You could have let them kill me. You're a king, but you stayed. You fought. You're a monster, Damian, but you chose to be a shield. He covered her hand with his own, his cold skin a strange comfort. I have not been a shield in 1,000 years, he breathed. Then you're out of practice, she said, a small, painful smile touching her lips. We should probably call the police. And tell them what? Damian asked, a trace of dark, wry humor returning. That the Starlight Diner was attacked by bigots and defended by a vampire king? We'll start with an attempted robbery, Ilara said, and we'll go from there. She swayed, the agony in her arms and the shock finally overwhelming her. Damian caught her, his movements swift and sure, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Your wounds, he said, his voice tight with urgency. I cannot heal this. This is anathema. It must be treated. Hospital, she mumbled, her head resting against his cold, solid chest. But the police. The police will find what they find, Damian said, striding toward the broken door, carrying her. Right now, the only thing that matters is the anchor. He stepped out into the fog, and Ilara, despite the searing pain, felt something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Safe. She realized, as the fog swirled around them, that the night had taught her something. It was a lesson written in her diner, in broken glass and silver burns. Heroes and monsters are not defined by what they are. They are not defined by fangs or badges. They are defined purely and simply by their choices. We all have a light and a darkness inside us. Some, like Vince, choose to use their small human power to bully and hurt. Others, like the purifiers, dress their hatred in righteousness and call it holy. And then there are the others, the ones who are by nature a storm, the ones who are monsters. But even a monster, she thought, can choose. It can choose to be a beast, or it can choose, as Damian had, to be an anchor. It can choose to be a shield. True monstrosity, Ilara thought as she drifted into a pained unconsciousness, is not about being a creature of the night. True monstrous gitty is seeing a light in the darkness and choosing to snuff it out just because you can. And true courage is being that light and choosing to shine anyway.